What's up, guys, and welcome into the Fantasy Mafia podcast. I am your host, Action Boss, aka Jerry, here with my two co-hosts, Doc, Dr. Fantasy, and Apex. What's going on, guys? How's it going today?
Oh, it's
pretty
going.
good.
Everybody at once.
Okay.
All right.
Pretty good, man. We're getting down to the wire of the season. About 2 weeks to go, almost.
Yeah, actually, by the time this podcast broadcasts or is going to be live for everybody, it will be 2 weeks from that day. It'll be on Thursday. So 2 weeks from today, we'll say, it's Houston versus the reigning champs, Kansas City Chiefs, to open up the season. We have a lot of stuff planned between now and then throughout the season itself. We're going to be going live a couple times a week. We're going to have recorded shows 3 to 4 times a week. Just every show is going to have something different. You're going to have your waiver wire show, your start sit on Sunday mornings, your injury report. We're going to try to get some guests on. We're in contact with some medical doctors on Twitter, trying to see if they could come on for a couple of shows, maybe even try to get them on consistently, like once a week, just to talk about the injury reports and stuff like that. So a lot of stuff planned for the regular season. It's going to be a weird season. I mean, we're going to have, not only are we going to have those regular injuries that the players are going to get, but there's the fear of COVID. There's we could see a bunch of guys putting together some top 12, top 24 weeks that we normally wouldn't see in any other season, just because of that. Today's show, we are talking about the top tight ends, and for the most part, tight ends, they're a streamable position. There's only really 2 to 4 absolute studs. Those are going to be the top 4 that we talk about, and then for the rest of them, it's basically just a plug and play, or try to find the best matchups. Like last year, you wanted to find the tight end that played against Arizona, maybe the tight end that played against the Giants. Those teams are pretty bad against the tight ends. So we got some guys. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the top 9 PPR tight ends that are ranked by Fantasy Pros. And then we each chose 2 of our own that we're going to talk about for you guys too. So in total, we're each going to have 5. We're going to have 15 total tight ends to talk about. But we're not just going to break down the top 15. We're going to break down the top 9 and then give you 2 of our favorites outside of the top 10 that we like. Any questions before we get started, guys?
I'm good. I'm ready to roll.
All
Let's
right.
go.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to break down like we've done our quarterbacks and wide receivers and running backs. So just talking about the tight ends. So I get to start us off here because I wanted this first guy. It's Hayden Hurst coming in at number 9. He's now with the Atlanta Falcons. He's stepping into an excellent situation for just anybody in a passing offense, but for him specifically as a tight end. The Atlanta Falcons have vacated 258 targets this year, with Austin Hooper going over to Cleveland. I believe they're adding in Mohamed Sanu in there too, because even though he was traded, he's still some targets that are now gone. Todd Gurley is now gone, or Todd Gurley's there now. Sorry about that.
That was fast.
Yeah, Todd Gurley's gone. But yeah, between Mohamed Sanu, Austin Hooper, and then some other guys, they have 258 open targets. Now, Hayden Hurst, he was kind of undershadowed by another guy that's on this list. Mark Andrews, we're going to talk about him a little bit later on. He's higher up on the list. So the Ravens drafted Mark Andrews and Hayden Hurst in the same draft, and they like to use a lot of 2 tight end sets. They even have another guy there too. Is it Boyle? He's still there?
Nick Boyle.
Boyle's still there.
Yep. So like he kind of is going to step in and kind of replace what Hayden Hurst was last year in Baltimore. But now Hayden Hurst comes over to Atlanta, and he gets to play in probably the most pass-happy offense that there is. They still have, they got guys that are going to be doubled up on the outside with Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. They brought in a running back that, although he does have some injury concerns, he's an upgrade from Devonta Freeman, so he's going to need to get some focus his way. So that tight end position is going to be just wide open there. I mean, Hayden Hurst, he honestly should be ranked higher. I would personally rank him higher, and if he wasn't in this top 9, and when I go to choose my other 2 that we're going to talk about, it would have been Hayden Hurst. He's probably my favorite tight end this year. I'm trying to grab him anywhere that I can. He really isn't going. Like he's not even being drafted in the top 9 tight ends. You see guys like Gronk is being drafted over him. I've seen Ebron be drafted over him a couple times, and Ebron's in another 2 tight end set over there in Pittsburgh now with Vance McDonald. So Hayden Hurst, he's just getting overlooked. And I don't know why, because like I said, Atlanta is they're pass heavy. Matt Ryan likes his tight end. We saw it past couple of years with Austin Hooper. Last year, Hayden Hurst he played all 16 games, 30 catches, 349 yards, 2 touchdowns. Like I said, he was overshadowed by Mark Andrews, and I just absolutely love him. I personally think he should be higher. I think by the end of the year we could see a top 4, top 5 guy here. I don't think we would put him in the same conversation as like your Travis Kelce and George Kittle and even Zach Ertz of the past couple of years, where we have these are the 3 guys you definitely need to grab first, and then you got all your other guys. But he's definitely with Atlanta. He's going to be, as long as he's there and as long as Matt Ryan's the quarterback, he's going to be within this top 8 to 10 range, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, I've seen his ADP rise more than any other tight end on the board, I would say. So, I mean, you mentioned a few times seeing him slip, but I think as we've done mocks and real drafts now over the past few weeks, I mean, I've seen him go as high as a top 5 tight end over Darren Waller, Ingram, Henry, all those names. So, I mean, he's one of the biggest risers that I've seen as we approach the season. You already mentioned a lot of the stats already. When you mention all those targets that were vacated, I mean, that's 40% of what the Falcons had last season. That's pretty significant, and it leads the entire league, the Falcons do, in vacated targets. And, I mean, Austin Hooper had a ton of production last year, only played 13 games, 97 targets, had an 18.5% target share. So Hayden Hurst is going to have an opportunity to step in and be a guy that could probably, or, I would probably bet that he sees over 100 targets as the third option in a pass-happy offense.
Yeah, no doubt. Any thoughts on him, Zach, before we get to the next guy?
I'm not as high on him as you guys are. I like all the vacated targets there. It's just a little difficult for me to just say that Hurts is going to come there and get everything that Hooper has. So he's got to get on the field and prove it first for me. But definitely has the opportunity and the ability, to be able to succeed this season. So I'm excited to see him. I'm a little hopeful that he kind of draws a little bit of the coverage away from Julio and Ridley, just to kind of give them a bump. We have to bring up Matt Ryan's name in this. He's got to be a quarterback that needs to be highly targeted because of all these weapons that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. They're going to be one of the pass heavy teams in the league. So if Hurts is able to really take a step forward this year with this opportunity, I think he could be a nice value where he's going right now.
All right, perfect. Next up, we got Hunter Henry coming in at number 8 for the Chargers. And I believe that was you, Apex, correct?
Indeed.
All right, sell us on Hunter Henry.
All right. Well, first thing I wanted to kick off was the competition for targets seemed to take a little bit of a hit. Mike Williams had a shoulder injury in practice. He's going to be a little week to week. We're not sure how much time he's going to miss. And there's not a lot of other weapons here for the Chargers here. We have Keenan Allen, who's always going to be a target hog. And the biggest question mark, I think, is at the quarterback position coming into this year. How's Tyrod or potentially Herbert down the road going to use these different weapons that he has? Hunter Henry played 12 games last year. He had 76 targets. He's a good part of the offense. I believe he's able to pick up some of the slack here, become sort of a security blanket for Tyrod over the middle of the field. With Rivers, he's shown some flashes. He's played behind the heels of Gates for a couple seasons and has really shown his ability to be able to perform at a high level. He was getting a lot of hype over the past couple of years. He ended up going down about a year or so ago and missing the entire season in the training camp injury. But for 2020, I think he could be a nice dark horse to finish in this top 10 range that you're going to be okay with if you miss out on some of the top tight ends that we'll get to later. Pretty consistent guy, I think. I think he's got a chance for some touchdown upside with, like I said, not a lot of weapons there around him to steal some targets. So, I can see he comes in at number 8 here. I can see this being a good spot for Hunter Henry.
All right, just feeding off that a little bit with Tyrod. He hasn't started a lot in this league. Now he had those 3 years that he started in Buffalo, and he did start out in Cleveland before he got hurt and Baker took over. But the 3 years that he was in Buffalo, he had Charles Clay, and these weren't Charles Clay's best years. His best years, he had a couple good years in Miami, but they were consistent years. The 3 years that he had Charles Clay, he had 51 for 528 and 3 touchdowns, 57 for 552 and 4 touchdowns, and 49 for 558 and 2 touchdowns. So touchdowns are, I mean, averaged out to be 3, and the yardage was within, 25 yards of each other. The targets were all about the same. So Tyrod's he looked the tight end's way. He's not a deep field or down the field passer by any means, and that's more what Mike Williams does. And if Mike Williams does happen to miss any time, I think Hunter Henry definitely gets a boost there. Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler out of the backfield, but I think Henry could be a pretty solid tight end here with Tyrod throwing him the football. Like I said, we've seen some consistency at least over that little 3 year span that he was able to hit Charles Clay and put up some decent weeks. Now, not like your Travis Kelce's and George Kittle's, but he's definitely a guy that you could trust in your lineup more often than not. Doc, any thoughts on Henry? And if not, then you can move on to your guy, Tyler Higbee at 7.
Yeah, so I'll go into Tyler Higbee. I mean, I think with Hunter Henry, he's being drafted fairly. He was 8th in points per game last season. I mean, there's question marks with Tyrod and how that offense is going to be run. So I think that's fair for him. I don't think he has a ton of upside at his ADP, but I think he's a reliable option, and I would call him their number 1 red zone threat. So I think it's a fair value for him. But with Tyler Higbee, I mean, this guy has continued to fly up draft boards. As a Rams fan, I mean, I caution people to not buy into the Tyler Higbee hype. And I've talked about Gerald Everett a little bit previously, but he's the primary pass catching tight end that the Rams have. And yeah, I know the whole storyline of them running 2 tight end sets, and I think that's a trend that's going to continue into this year. So Higbee and Everett will both be on the field, but Higbee up to this point has really been more of a run and pass blocker, and that's really his specialty. He's one of the highest rated run blockers among the tight end position in the entire league. And when you look at when Gerald Everett was healthy last season, yeah, I mean, it would be crazy for me, though, with all the negatives with Gerald Everett coming back, it would be crazy for me, though, to not talk about how dominant he was during that 5-game stretch. It was a small sample size, but I think it's, I just can't stress enough how important it is to understand this offense, and that Higbee's role isn't of a pass catcher with Woods, Cooper Kupp. I would probably put Van Jefferson and Josh Reynolds ahead of Tyler Higbee. I'd put Gerald Everett ahead of him. So there's quite a few guys ahead of him. They are a pass-happy offense, but I don't know if the targets are going to be there for him to put up top 10 numbers. But going into that stretch last season, it kind of started week 12, I'll say. So he against the Ravens, he was the number 13 tight end. Then he was number 1, number 5, number 3, number 7, number 1. So he was consistently a top 5 option, really. And funny enough, you already mentioned this team, but can you guess who he was playing when he was the number 1 tight end twice? I mean, it's the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's another factor that plays into that. I personally, and I've mentioned this before, the Cardinals aren't going to be as bad defending the tight end position, so don't get suckered into that, because that's why they drafted Isaiah Simmons, who's a really athletic linebacker and talented in coverage. I know that's probably not something a lot of people are considering in fantasy, but I don't expect the Cardinals to struggle against tight ends as much as they did last season. But Tyler Higbee was the number 1 tight end during those 5 games by a pretty wide margin. I mean, he had over 100 points during those 5 games, so he dominated, but it was really a matter of, you can see as soon as Everett went down, Higbee stepped in. He was running very similar routes, and I wouldn't be surprised if we were talking about Gerald Everett as a top, I won't say top 10, but a top 15 guy next season instead of Tyler Higbee.
All right. So of the 3 that we talked about so far, who would you rather have if they all had the same ADP, Hurst, Henry, or Higbee?
I mean, I'd go with Hayden Hurst. I think he has the most upside. of all three of those names. Hunter Henry, like I said, I think he's a really safe option, and I haven't mentioned it yet, but I think this is the deepest the tight end position has ever been in fantasy, like in the history of fantasy. I mean, I've been playing since 2003 now, and I can't remember a year where there's been, I can argue 20 tight ends and make their case for being top 10 guys. And I think it's just a matter of how the NFL and that position's evolving. But Hayden Hurst is in a very pass happy offense. He's definitely the third option there. I don't think Russell Gage is going to take that many targets from him. So when you consider that, he has the most upside at that ADP.
All right. Going into number 6 here, that's me again. We got Evan Ingram. He's obviously he's with the New York Giants. He's had a couple injury-riddled seasons. Last year he only played 8 games. The year before that he only played 11 games. And this is off of his rookie year where he had 115 targets, played all 15 out of the 16 games, 722 yards, 6 touchdowns on 64 catches. Thought that he was the next big tight end for the New York Giants, which he still can be. I mean, he's only 25, 26 years old now. He's definitely got some opportunity there. With Daniel Jones, he's obviously a young quarterback going into his second year, and we seem to talk about it quite a bit. Anytime we talk about tight ends and young quarterbacks, we try to put that correlation together. I see more of Evan Ingram. I see him, if he can stay healthy, I can see him having a pretty big year for the fact that and I've mentioned this before, the Giants have a really tough schedule. And how does that make sense, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. It's going to be
Nobody asked.
The tough defenses that they play, number one, they're going to try to shut down Saquon Barkley because he's by far the best and most explosive option on that offense as far as weapons go. So they're going to try to shut him down. And there's going to be some teams that, at least maybe if they don't, they're at least going to do their best to try. They got Pittsburgh on the schedule, Chicago, San Francisco, Dallas has a pretty good defense now. The Redskins or the Washington football team, if they have any kind of plus to that team, it's the defense for sure. The Eagles. So these are all teams that they play within the first 10 weeks, with a couple of other teams sprinkled in there too, who also have pretty good defenses. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have an excellent front seven. So if Daniel Jones has any time to pass at all, and he can't get it to Saquon Barkley out of the backfield, it's going to go to Evan Ingram over the middle, or in those short routes. Now, Slayton, Golden Tate, and Sterling Shepard, they're all slot receiver type receivers, so they are probably going to be going over the middle too. But Ingram, I believe, is the safest option of everybody there. There's really no huge chemistry between any of them. I mean, Slayton probably has the most chemistry with Daniel Jones between everybody, all the pass catchers on that team from the time that they played last year together. But having a tight end like Evan Ingram, his body size, he's got excellent hands. Having him there over the middle while these big defenders, T.J. Watt, Khalil Mack, Nick Bosa, they're all chasing you down. Evan Ingram's a nice safety blanket to get you those PPR points and try to move the chains a little bit over the middle. And he's not my favorite tight end on this list. I mean, obviously, I think Hayden Hurst is probably my favorite tight end on the list, but he's definitely a guy that if I could get him late enough, I would definitely target because of I'm just pushing the injury to the side. If he plays all 16 games, I think that he could have a really solid season in Daniel Jones' second year and kind of just helping him get out of trouble with these tough defenses that they face. And we got Zach, you're up with Darren Waller. If you want to touch on Higbee and Ingram, you can. If not, just dip right into Waller.
Well, you guys echo a lot of my thoughts. I am a little bit higher on Evan Ingram, as well as I'm lower on Tyler Higbee, as Doc pointed out. But for me, just like you said, Ingram's going to be that security blanket for Jones over the middle, and he definitely possesses a lot of athletic ability. So I like Ingram this year in the middle round tight end range. Moving on to Darren Waller, you had mentioned about the top 2 or 4 tight ends. I was guessing that you probably left off Darren Waller. I believe, he had a great breakout year last year with, 117 targets. He had 90 receptions for over 1,100 yards. The only area that I want him to improve in is his touchdowns. He only had 3 touchdowns, but I swear I was watching that Green Bay Packers game, and he probably got into the end zone 3 or 4 times, and it kept getting called back on penalties. So, I expect Waller to be a top option for this offense. I just saw today that Tyrell Williams has a torn labrum in his shoulder. So again, another situation where the competition around him is getting hurt, unfortunately. So it's just a lot of people, the offseason narrative have said all the draft capital they got and the people that they signed and all the weapons that they brought in we're going to take away from Waller's opportunity there. And now we're seeing them kind of, fall one by one. We have Ruggs, who's a slot guy, speedster, who's not really going to take Darren Waller targets. And then Renfro, another slot guy, so Waller's got the middle of the field to himself, similar to what you were talking about with Evan Ingram. So I don't expect a drop in targets at all. I expect him to remain one of Derek Carr's top options, and it's a little intriguing to see him, kind of fall in later rounds. It seems like we have the top 4 tight ends go, and then we have like a 2 to 3 round stretch where we're not seeing Darren Waller come off the board until like the middle or late 7th or something like that. So I think he presents a tremendous value where he's getting drafted at, and especially for a top 5 tight end with the ability to finish higher as he did last year. So I'm very high on Darren Waller this year. I expect another big season for him.
Yeah, I think the only reason that he's kind of just not necessarily dropping down, but he's not up in that top 4 with the next 4 guys that we're going to talk about actually, is because of the kind of moves and stuff that Vegas has made over the offseason and the hype that they're getting. Obviously, they were the first team to take a wide receiver off the board, so they think that he's just going to come in and kind of take some targets away with Henry Ruggs. And then they go and grab Bryan Edwards a little bit later on in the draft, and now he's getting a lot of looks, and he's slowly creeping up draft boards too. You could still get him real late, 14th, 15th round, but he's definitely a steal if you grab him. They obviously brought in Jason Witten, who is a dinosaur, but he's definitely going to command some targets. And then they also said they want to get Josh Jacobs involved a little bit more. So if Darren Waller I definitely think he's going to lose a little bit of targets, but he can make up what he loses just by touchdowns. He only had 3 touchdowns last year, so even just some more touchdowns is going to help him. And that's where the little bit of a gap comes from, is he didn't get into the end zone as much as you'd like your tight end that had over 115 targets and 90-something receptions or 80-something receptions last year. He only had 3 touchdowns, so just law of averages, it has to go up, I guess. But there's a lot more targets on that team now than what there was a year ago. Hunter Renfro, we haven't even mentioned. He started to come on a little bit later on in the season. We don't even know where he's going to fit in. He kind of plays over the middle just like Darren Waller does. Even though they're 2 completely different body types, they still cover the same area of the field. The funny thing I want to bring up, though, is last week when we talked about wide receiver. Who did we talk about last week? We talked about wide receivers, right? No, quarterbacks.
Yep.
Forgot who we talked about. Whoever it was.
Wide receivers.
Was it? Well, whatever it was, we had our other admin on here, Blake, and all the wide receivers that he got were guys from his division except for his team. So he's a Bears fan. He had a Packer, he had a Lion, and he had a Viking. And now this week we're talking about tight ends, and you have all 3 of the tight ends that had kind of a major injury from their team that kind of just boosts that tight end stock. Now, you can't really boost George Kittle up that much, and that's who your next guy is, and you'll get to him. But San Fran had an injury, Vegas had an injury, and the Chargers had an injury. So all your guys are getting boosted up. I just wanted to put that little stat out there. But moving on to the next one here, it is Zach Ertz. Doc, that is you, if you want to touch on any of the last couple of guys we talked about. If not, just jump right into Zach Ertz.
Yeah, I'll quickly mention Darren Waller. I kind of like him depending on where you can get him. I don't think he's going to get as many targets as he had last year, and essentially he was a volume play. and I think that's the kind of tight end that he needs to be. So if that target share goes down at all, I think it has a huge impact. I know I've said a few times, people think I'm nuts, but Jason Witten's going to eat into that target share. I don't care how old he is. He had 83 targets last season with the Cowboys, and the Cowboys have a better wide receiver core than the Raiders do. So he was taking targets away from guys like Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, and I mean he was probably the fourth option in that passing game. But I mean he's just he's a legend at that position, and quarterbacks trust him. So I know it's insane, but Jason Witten is going to take some targets, and I don't expect his touchdown numbers to go up at all because people don't talk about Foster Moreau, who was another rookie tight end they had last year, but he was actually a beast in the red zone, and that's the guy they look at in the red zone. He only played 11 games, but he had 5 touchdowns, and I know I like him. I think he's a great red zone threat. Not really fantasy relevant, but I think Waller, if he slips into that like 8th round range, is a pretty good value because he's going to have volume. He'll have around probably 90 to 100 targets, but I don't know if he's going to be in that 120 range like he was last year. So that's my only issue with him. But Zach Ertz, I honestly don't have a lot to say. Once you start getting into these top few tight ends, I think the difference here is that Zach Ertz is the number one option on his team. And that's what we're talking about with these top guys. When we talk about Kittle, Andrews, and Travis Kelce, they're the top options on their team. And really, I just said it with Darren Waller. But when you're looking at a top tight end, it's all about volume. And Zach Ertz is going to be one of the leaders in targets among the tight end position. He was number 2 last season. It doesn't matter if Dallas Goedert's there. They're both going to be target monsters. This is the most tight end heavy offense in the entire NFL. They run 2 tight end sets over 75% of the time. So, I mean, it's very, very tight end heavy. And Zach Ertz is going to be the number one option. I guess the only negative against Ertz for me is his ADP. I mean, I see him slip into that 5th round, right around there most of the time. And that's not a spot I'm personally comfortable with because, like I said, I think this is a really deep tight end class. And I think you can find more upside in rounds 8 through 12. But Zach Ertz is one of the safest options at tight end. If you want to lock down that position and have a plug-and-play guy every week, he's your guy, especially if you're drafting and you're not high on any of the running backs going on in that range. I mean, there's times where I've seen you're deciding between Zach Ertz and David Montgomery. If you don't think David Montgomery is going to turn around or maybe your running back position is set, I don't mind taking Zach Ertz. But overall, I tend to like to load up on running backs and wide receivers in the range that Ertz is going. So I'm not completely sold on taking him at that ADP.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, I mean he kind of dropped a little bit from the past couple of years. We were talking about just the past couple of years that it was Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz were the top 3. But Mark Andrews kind of jumped into there now, kind of bumping Zach Ertz down a little bit. Plus the addition of Dallas Goedert that the Eagles have from a couple of drafts ago. They run a lot of 2 tight end sets, or Goddard's getting on the field a little bit more because I wouldn't say that he's a Zach Ertz clone, but he's definitely a very nice complementary piece to Zach Ertz. And if we were to see Zach Ertz go, Goddard could definitely step in and be the number 1, and we may be talking about Dallas Goedert in this spot next year. Moving into the top 3, we've said it multiple times already just this episode. You guys kind of already know who they are, and if you've done any kind of drafts, I mean, we're at the end of August, so I'm sure you guys know who the top 3 tight ends are. But all 3 of these guys, and the way that Fantasy Pros does their rankings is they have a bunch of experts submit their rankings anywhere between, I mean, depending on the time of year, you could have 20 guys submit their rankings and a list is compiled, or 150 guys submit their rankings and a list is compiled. So in this case, it was 84 experts submitting their tight end rankings, and at the very least, one of them had each of these guys ranked number 1 in their rankings for tight ends. So that's including Mark Andrews. So somebody out there, maybe multiple somebodies, but at least one somebody has Mark Andrews ranked number 1 over Kelsey and Kittle, which is, I mean, definitely understandable. He was one of the top tight ends last year. He led the league in touchdowns from the tight end position, one of 3 players in the entire league to have 3 or double-digit receiving touchdowns outside of running backs. he is. This is the other guy that was splitting, not even really splitting time. He was on the field with Hayden Hurst last year, and Mark Andrews was the one that emerged. He's Lamar Jackson's favorite target besides Lamar Jackson's legs. He, I mean, even with regression from Lamar Jackson and even Mark Andrews, he's still going to get into the end zone 7, 8 times. He's still going to catch the ball a lot of times. I mean, I got his stats up here right now. Last year he was targeted 98 times for 64 receptions, 852 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Now, there's no reason why those targets, receptions, and yardage has to go away. That could remain exactly the same. The touchdowns, I mean, you can't really predict touchdowns. Those can take a dip, but at the same time, I mean, they could stay the same. I mean, this Baltimore Ravens offense can move the football. They're going to get into the red zone a lot. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns. Will we see Lamar get 36 again? Maybe, maybe not. I'm on the
40.
maybe not side, but there's no reason why, even with say 28 touchdowns, Mark Andrews can't have 9, 10 of them. I mean, maybe we see a little bit of a jump up from Hollywood Brown. Maybe we see one of these rookie wide receivers come in and take some work away, and maybe we see J.K. Dobbins get some receiving work. But for now, Mark Andrews is the top receiving option on that team. As Doc already said, that's what these top 3 to 4 guys are: Zach Ertz, Andrews, Kittle, and Kelsey. And yeah, I mean, He's definitely has the potential to finish as the number 1 overall tight end above Kelsey and Kittle. And the only reason I don't have him on a lot of teams is because of his draft capital. Same reason with Doc and Zach Ertz, and I'm sure Mark Andrews is in the same boat for you. But if you could get your hands on him, or if you're comfortable with your first couple picks, and Mark Andrews is sitting there, say at the end of the 3rd round, you got that turn, that 3-12, 4-1 turn. Take Mark Andrews and be happy with a tight end that you can trust for all 16 games. And we got Apex here for George Kittle, number 2, comes in as number 2 on the list. If you want to touch on Andrews, Ertz, or Waller, or Andrews or Ertz, you already touched on Waller. You can. If not, then you could jump right into Kittle.
I'll touch on Andrews a little bit. You know, I like him similar to you guys. We just recently did our Superflex Dynasty. I ended up getting Mark Andrews in like the 6th round. So, you know, you're talking about him at the end of the 3rd. So it kind of depends on your league type. You know, we are, you know, among the opinion that there's a lot of tight ends out there. So they kind of fell in our draft. I believe, you know, Kelsey was in the 5th. And I ended up grabbing Mark Andrews in the 6th. So, you know, definitely, as you said, he's the top option. That kind of leads into Kittle. Kittle's definitely the top option as well. You know, I don't need to, you know, sit here and prove to you how good George Kittle is. He's just a monster out there. He's, you know, he averaged about 8 targets a game last year, and that's, you know, that was even down from the year before. He did end up missing 2 games, so that kind of, you know, took away some opportunity a little bit. But, you know, you look at the 49ers, you know, current state of their team, and Debo is, you know, up in the air for week 1. He suffered the injury in June, so we're not sure if he's going to be out there or how long he's not going to be out there. And, you know, Brandon Ayuk, the first-round receiver they just drafted, he's came up a couple practices ago with a hamstring injury. So, you know, the list goes on for them. It just basically all kind of concludes that George Kittle is going to be the number 1. And you know, Doc mentioned it with Ertz. I think Kittle's probably going to be the target leader for tight ends in fantasy this year, just because, you know, even with these guys healthy, you have a rookie in Ayuk and you know, you have a 2nd-year Debo Samuel. That's not going to be a target hog, but he's going to get his share. You have George Kittle here that is just the 1st, 2nd, 3rd option for Jimmy Garoppolo. And, you know, I can guarantee that, you know, Jimmy's already thinking in his head that if he's in any kind of trouble, he's got to find George Kittle. Mm-hmm. And if he hadn't, you know, already targeted him on the pass already. But, you know, so, you know, that's basically Kittle in a vacuum. You're going to see a ton of receptions based off of the targets. You're going to see a similar yards. He's gone over 1,000 the last 2 years. He had 1,300 in 2018 before missing a couple games last year, and he's going to get into the end zone as well. So, Kelsey, Kittle, they are interchangeable 1 and 2. Nobody can fault you for taking Kittle at number 1 over Kelsey. So these guys are just elites, and probably the only two that I'm willing to spend up on in drafts in that like mid-second to third round range.
Yeah, and they between both Kelsey and Kittle, they both signed some big deals for their team, so they're going to be in dynasty leagues at least. They're going to be around for a little bit now. Kelsey is the little older one. He's 31, where I think Kittle is 26 or so.
27.
27, so 4 year difference, but they both signed similar length deals. So even with Kelsey being a little bit older, they're still, if you grab either one, you're going to get them. I mean, you might get Kittle for longer. He could have another contract in him, but at least for the foreseeable future, they're both going to be there for the same amount of time. Doc, I'm going to give you a little bit of a challenge here. I hope do you like challenges?
My gosh.
I
No,
mean,
I'm sleeping.
there's really not much that you can say to sell us on Travis Kelsey, and same thing with George Kittle. But Apex did a pretty good job of selling us. So why don't you sell us on why Travis Kelsey won't finish as tight end 1? Try to
Oh,
try to push
wow.
somebody else up, because
Pivot.
otherwise it's just one sentence. Travis Kelsey is the number 1 target for Patrick Mahomes. That's enough. That's all you need. Take him in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that if somebody's going to finish ahead of Kelsey or Kittle, I mean, it comes down to who has the potential to be the number 1 target on their team. I mean, I mentioned that before, but before I actually get into that, just a random thought that popped into my head. I think it's kind of interesting that Andrews and Kittle are 2 of the top 3 guys. Because, you tend to target guys that are in pass-happier offenses, and those 2 offenses were the bottom 2 teams in pass attempts. So it's just kind of interesting to think about Andrews and Kittle being the number 1 targets on run-heavy teams, but they still have a ton of fantasy relevance. So I think that's kind of interesting. But when you're looking at other tight ends that could potentially finish above Travis Kelsey, I think the biggest thing is you could argue that Travis Kelsey isn't the number 1 target on his team. You could see them target Tyreek Hill more this season. You could see them target Allaire, taking away targets potentially. So they do have options there. Even Sammy Watkins had over 90 targets last season. People forget about him, but he actually had a pretty solid
I
year.
forgot about him.
Hardman advances. Yeah, I mean, I tried. I think you and I probably tried to as a Bills and a Rams fan, but I mean, so it comes down to if Kelsey loses targets to those other options, I think that's probably where you'd see him slip. But if you're looking at other guys that could potentially finish ahead of him, I know it's crazy, and I've kind of argued against people that have said this before, but Evan Ingram does have that potential. I mean, he was on a pace to almost have over 1,000 yards, and when you look at all those other options, I think Evan Ingram could be the number 1 target in with the Giants. I mean, those are other solid options. I mean, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard. I like Darius Slayton's upside, but these at this point they're just solid options. Evan Ingram's explosive, and he has game-changing ability when he is on the field. So for him, I think it's a matter of just staying on the field, and I do think he could jump into that elite category given a 16-game season. And I know we hate talking about that, but based on Evan Ingram's history, it's a pretty valid and relevant point to bring up to this point. So, I mean, I think that's the only way. You're going to have to see a tight end. Like, I love Mike Gesicki, who I'm going to talk about a little bit. So I know Caveman loves Devontae Parker in our group, but I mean, the reality is Mike Gesicki was a top 10 guy down the stretch last season. If he's able to continue to build rapport with Ryan Fitzpatrick or even Tua, if Tua ends up starting, I love Tua's accuracy, and I don't really think it hurts Gesicki too much, but at the end of the day, I think that he has the potential to jump into that elite range just because I do think he could be their number 1 target. I think he's a game changer with his athleticism at the tight end position. Devontae Parker, I think, can continue to develop into a number 1 wide receiver. But when you have a big tight end like Gesicki that can line up in the slot, move to the outside, line up next to their tackle, and move all around the field, there's a ton of value to an offense in that. So I think in order for Kelsey to not finish number 1, you're going to have to see one of these guys really establish themselves as the number 1 target with their offense.
Yeah, and fun fact, 806. Not only does Caveman love Devontae Parker, but he also loves Evan Ingram too. So it's a couple guys that we talked about today. So that is the top 9. And with that being said, I do have a little ticker here that I'm going to add onto the screen. You guys can't see it, but when you watch this video back later, YouTube will be able to see how awesome it looks. I got a nice golden yellow color font scrolling across the top 9 tight ends, and it just looks beautiful. We're just adding every day to this podcast that we do, just making the experience the number one experience that's out there for you guys. So we only talked about 3 guys each. We each have 2 more guys that we personally like that are outside of the top 9 that we believe can finish either in the top 9 or just people that you should go out and either be like a streamer option or take late in your draft and try to find a consistent option there, because that's the tough thing about the tight ends is you know who your consistent guys are, and we don't even know if Mark Andrews is going to be a consistent guy. Like he's there at number 3. Zach Ertz, he's shown some consistency over his years, but Mark Andrews, at the end of the day, he's only had the 1 season with Lamar Jackson. And then, so we don't know if he's going to replicate what he did last year, or if he just kind of was a 1-year wonder and kind of just falls off the face of the earth. So, for now, I mean, he's ranked number 3, and it's a good ranking, especially with the season that he had last year. But we want to try to find that next Darren Waller, that next Mark Andrews, and that's what we're going to try to do with these next couple picks that we got. So we'll keep the same order, which is kind of jumping around because we'll give you the ranking that they come in on the ranking sheet, but we'll keep the same order. So I'll start here. My first guy that I got is Jonnu Smith of the Tennessee Titans. They got him ranked in a PPR league at 16. So that's in that TE2 range, kind of sandwiched between one of the guys that you're going to talk about, Jordan, and another guy that Apex is going to talk about with Dallas Goedert in the middle. So kind of you got the number 15 guy, Apex has the 18 guy, Goddard 17, Jonnu Smith comes in at 16. So we saw last year Jonnu Smith with the Tennessee Titans. We saw the Titans kind of be a strong, run-heavy team that was just on the legs of Derrick Henry, and for good reason. I mean, if you got Derrick Henry back there and Earl Thomas is your lead blocker, you're not gonna not give Derrick Henry the ball. But they have to have some kind of passing game there. AJ Brown going into his 2nd season, he's definitely a very viable option. He's getting picked in those middle rounds. I don't know off the top of my head what his exact ADP is, but they need a guy outside of A.J. Brown, that Ryan Tannehill with his shiny new 4-year, $114 million contract that he could throw to. Corey Davis has been kind of a bum up to this point. Adam Humphries you don't get real excited about Adam Humphries as you would if, say, he went to New England or if he stayed in Tampa Bay and was catching balls with Jameis Winston down there. But so that guy, I think, is Jonnu Smith. He's an excellent tight end. He's a big body, 6'3", 248 pounds. He played in all 16 games last year, had 35 catches for 439 yards and 3 touchdowns. I believe all of those numbers just shoot up. Half of the season was with Marcus Mariota, so now we get a full season with Ryan Tannehill. We get to see if he can take that next step. This is his 4th year going. This is his 4th season. He had 44 targets last year. Turned that into 35 receptions. I think that all of those numbers he could probably get into like the 75, 80 target range with about 60, 65 receptions, maybe double up his yardage and get a couple more touchdowns and kind of put him up there with your Zach Ertz's and Darren Waller's and just kind of just make some magic happen. But Jonnu Smith, he's going real late. I've grabbed him in a couple drafts that we've done recently. I'm in probably 20 sleeper leagues right now, and all the drafts happen to be going on at the same exact time. Jonnu Smith I've grabbed in, for the most part, the last 2 to 3 rounds. sometimes as my first tight end, other times as my second tight end with upside. But I'm happy to go into the season if I had him as my TE1 and just start him right out of the gate and see what happens. And if he doesn't have any kind of chemistry with Ryan Tannehill, I'll just drop him and just go the streaming route. But I think that Jonnu Smith can kind of be that next guy there and kind of give another passing option to the Tennessee offense, so they don't have to run Derrick Henry into the ground.
Yep. Yeah, I think he's a reasonable one. I've mentioned the targets numerous times, but I mean, you could argue that Jonnu's probably going to be their number 2 target in that passing game. So he'll definitely have an opportunity, even if it's not a high volume passing game. I already mentioned it with Kittle and Andrews. Maybe that doesn't matter as much as we think. I mean, I definitely think that his targets have to go up from 45. I mean, that's not very many targets, and he was really productive with the targets that he did get. So I think he's one of those guys. It's just a matter of more volume for him to produce.
All right, so now we are on to Apex here. Who do you want to go with?
I'll kick it off with Doyle.
So
Why
we
not?
already mentioned that he comes in at number 18 on the list here.
All right. Well, one quick thing I wanted to bring up, I fact checked it. Wanted to make sure we were right. I mentioned George Kittle was 27. He's actually still 26. He will turn 27 in early October. So I just wanted to get that fact in there.
Oh, so he gets a month
And,
of being 26, huh?
He does. He does. That makes all the difference. But Jack Doyle here, he's not your super sexy guy. I can't sit here and talk about how much upside he has and how athletic he is, because he's just not. He's just a good possession guy, and that's what Philip Rivers likes. He likes Antonio Gates. Henry had a little bit more talent, athletic ability, but here we have Jack Doyle. Henry had a 68 catch percentage with Rivers last season. Doyle's never been under 75%, except for last year with Brissett. So I believe Rivers coming in is going to give him a really good quarterback to throw to the tight end position, and Ebron is also gone. That vacates about 52 targets in that offense. They're going with the drafted rookie Michael Pittman Jr. So it remains to be seen how that's going to figure out. They got other options like Pascal and Campbell, but nobody that's really screaming that they're going to make this jump up besides maybe Michael Pittman. But over the middle of the field, he's definitely, like I said, Rivers loves the tight end. He's going to be that security blanket. So, I can see his target share going up a little bit, as well as his catch percentage. He's going to be catching those targets. As I said, 3 out of every 4 passes that he gets targeted with, he's going to catch. So that's definitely going to give you a safe weekly floor. Give him a couple of chances at the end zone with Ebron there. He was a big red zone guy last year, so I'm not gonna sit here and say Jack Doyle has the path to be a top 10 or whatever, but he's just a safe guy that maybe if you're in a deeper flex league and going through some bye weeks or injuries, he's a guy that you can stick in there and get a nice game from that, as well as maybe in your tight end position, he's a bye week filler, or just somebody that you can take later in the drafts and just kind of be okay with if you decided to punt the position completely.
Yeah, no, it's I definitely like the Jack Doyle pick. He's going to have some very streamable options. I mean, Jacksonville comes to mind. They play them twice. They don't really have a really good defense. So if I'm sitting there and my regular tight ends on a bye week, and Jack Doyle's going up against Jacksonville, I might pick him up for that week. And we all know that Philip Rivers loves his tight ends. And even before Philip Rivers got there, and you mentioned Eric Ebron. Doyle missed some time the year that Ebron had 13 touchdowns, but then when Doyle came back and Ebron still had 13 touchdowns, Doyle was still getting a lot of looks. It was kind of like a 1A, 1B. It wasn't really like Ebron took over that season. He did have the better fantasy season because of all the touchdowns, but it wasn't like he kind of just took over that number 1 spot and kind of put Doyle in the back seat. Doyle was still pretty relevant as far as like being a real life NFL tight end, and he just didn't have all the numbers that you'd want out of him. But so I mean, he's as reliable as they come, and I think he's going to have a really good year with Philip Rivers there. Let's go over to you, Doc. You've already mentioned one of your guys, so I'll let you get a little bit deeper into him, and that's Noah Fant, or not Noah Fant. Um,
Oh
that's
my gosh! I
I
thought
just
you revealed
ruined
the
it.
next one.
I
Spoiler.
ruined
Oh,
it.
oh my,
That's
cancel.
Mike Gesicki. He comes in. He just misses our list actually of what we talked about today, but to make it even, to where we all talk about the same amount of guys, we had to drop it down to 9. So Gesicki comes in at actually number 10. So
Wow.
let's hear your thoughts on Mike Gesicki and why should I buy him everywhere?
Yeah, no, that makes me happy. Normally he's in like that 15 range. I haven't
He's
seen him
just
creep into
booming
the
on up
top
there. You
10, but
draft right. You draft right now. You're not going to get him.
I think I'm in so many leagues that I'm just upping that ADP at this point.
It's you
But
single
that's probably,
handedly.
yeah, probably that's why I took him from 15 to 10. That's nice.
Just like Joe
But I mean,
Mixon's ADP jumped up to like
um,
number 1.2.
with Caveman, yeah,
Yep.
he has. One thing before I get into Gasicki quick is we haven't really talked about tight end strategy specifically. So before
Punt
I
him.
talk about Gasicki, punt it, yeah, yeah, I would draft a punter. Yeah, but if you miss out on Kelsey or Kittle, I mean, my strategy is to just wait on one of these young upside guys. Because like I mentioned with Ertz, I'm not a fan of taking a tight end in that 4, 5, 6 range because you still have some solid wide receiver and running back options, and I think you need to load up on those positions as quickly as you can. But I mean, I should have talked about it more when I talked about Kelsey. But when you draft Travis Kelsey, it gives you a huge positional advantage, and that's one of the reasons I used to be really sour on drafting Kelsey early. But honestly, I've seen a few people where they'll draft McCaffrey first, and then they've taken Lamar and Kelsey back to back with 2.12 and 3.1. And actually, I kind of like that strategy because you have 3 positional advantages then when you look at it. You have the best running back, you could have the best tight end, and best quarterback. So I kind of like that strategy, even though it leaves you a little thin at running back. But Kelsey would have finished as wide receiver 8 last season. So you're really getting a wide receiver 1 when you're taking him. And when you look at it that way, his ADP of a late second round pick is really pretty reasonable because that's where you're looking at the top 10 or so wide receivers going. So I like where he's going. So, but if you miss out on either one of those guys, Mike Gesicki is usually my guy. I've taken him as my backup a few times as well with upside. You mentioned that previously, but I actually tend to do that with tight ends. I like taking a guy that I can rely on. And I did it. I loved Mark Andrews last season. He was my backup tight end in a lot of leagues, and he ended up starting for me and being obviously really effective. But I think Gesicki kind of fits that same role. I mean, I like the sexy athletic tight ends personally. I mean, he's one of the most athletic
Who
tight
doesn't?
ends in the entire league. Yeah, I
Who
mean,
doesn't like sexy
my,
tight ends?
everybody should. I know. Yeah. Anyway,
That's for
I
that's
was
for
gonna make a
Fantasy
Moving
Mafia
comment.
on.
after
I was
hours.
gonna make a comment, but I was like, I don't want to take that any further than we already did. So, yeah, I mean, when it comes to athleticism, I mean, all he scored higher at the combine and everything compared to Travis Kelsey. So, I mean, that's how athletic he is. A lot of people think of Kelsey as the most athletic tight end in the league right now, and Gesicki is right there with him. So, I'll go through his stretch last season because I had him ranked 6th in my tight end rankings, and a lot of people gave me a hard time with that. But when you look at his numbers last season, from weeks 8 to 17, he was tight end 8. And then more specifically, the last 5 weeks of the season, weeks 13 to 17, he was tight end 6. So actually, even though it's a small sample size, he's already proven that he can do it. Like I mentioned, I think he's going to get a ton of targets. He had a 15% target share last season, and a lot of that didn't come till the second half of the season. And I think it went under the radar, but he did have 89 targets last season, which was 7th among all tight ends. So a big majority of that came in the second half. So I really think if he repeats that second half, you're looking at a top 5 guy this season. And I haven't even mentioned the Chan Gailey offense yet, which is very pass happy. So even though he hasn't targeted tight ends heavily in that scheme previously, that's one of the things that concerns me a little bit. But I really think that this is their best pass catching option. And Chan Gailey's a smart guy, and he'll get them involved.
Yeah, and I mean just feeding off that a little bit. You mentioned that that Chan Gailey doesn't really target the tight ends. At the same time, you think about going down to Tampa Bay, Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. Bruce Arians doesn't target the tight ends, but you know that he's going to target the tight ends down there. So if they kind of just feed off of what they had last year with Mike Gesicki, seeing what he did towards the end of the season, in the last half of the season, then there's no reason why you shouldn't at least game plan and have Gesicki added into your offense a little bit more, even if that's not even if that's not how you came up and became the coach that you were. You don't let your best players not get the ball, and that's Gesicki is one of the best players on that team. You didn't even mention anything about the opt-outs that they had. You didn't mention anything about Preston Williams coming off that ACL, which all of that is going to just help Gesicki even more, and that's. Yeah, I mean, if he wasn't a your guy, I think he would be a my guy, and you definitely sold me on him since we started. If you were to tell me back in February that Gesicki was going to be a top 10 tight end and even could dip into the top 5, I might not have believed you, but you've definitely sold me over the course of talking with you this summer, and I'm going to try to just snipe him from you in every draft that we have from here on out.
Too late.
Going into our next 3 that we have. This next guy, I really don't have any shares of at all. I like his opportunity. He's got another newer quarterback thrown to him, not new to the league, but new to his team, and that's Ian Thomas of the Carolina Panthers. And just like with Jonnu Smith, and I didn't even mention it, Delaney Walker's not there anymore, obviously, and now Ian Thomas, he doesn't have Greg Olsen there anymore. So both of my guys kind of just they went from being their team's number 2s and kind of stepping into their number 1s now. And we've talked about it many times when we talked about Carolina's offense on the Carolina mini pod that we had. The type of quarterback that Teddy Bridgewater is he's not really a down the field deep thrower like that. So that, like Robbie Anderson, they did sign him, but I don't think he's going to be all that crazy. It's going to be those DJ Moores. You can't take the ball away from Christian McCaffrey, so he's going to get his catches out of the backfield. And then if I were to have another piece of the offense, it would be Ian Thomas. It's kind of like the same argument as when I said Evan Ingram, but those over the middle, kind of just getting open, giving him a little bit of a safety blanket. He's played 16 games both of the past 2 years. But with Greg Olsen there, he was kind of in the shadow. But he had 30 targets last year, 16 receptions, 136 yards, and 1 touchdown. So nothing too flashy. It's another one of those things where kind of if you see a tight end plus matchup, he's a good streamer. I'm not saying go out and draft him, but he's a guy that could put together a few good weeks and maybe help you win some games. Now, being in the NFC South, you got the Buccaneers, you got the Saints, and you got the Falcons, where there's going to be a lot of points. They have to go back and forth. Those 6 games right there, I would probably look at Ian Thomas and say that there's potential for shootouts and have Ian Thomas come in and get you some points. So even if you don't play him the other 10 games of the season, just against the NFC South, I would consider him if I don't have one of those top guys, or if my guy's on a bye week and they got those matchups. And yeah, I mentioned Tampa Bay has a nice front 7, and they got some really good coverage linebackers. Atlanta's defense stinks, so that's definitely